It's understandable to consider that America's vast land territory is one of the many reasons why it's one of the most powerful countries in this day and age. But weren't you ever curious as to how the United States ended up with its great territory today? Today, we'll explore the war that has had a significant impact on the United States until today. Hi there, welcome to our channel. This is Eventful Insights, and today we'll explore the Mexican-American War. Together, let's find out what caused this war, its key events, and its impact. Before we begin, let's see how familiar you are with this topic. Do you know what treaty the Mexican-American War resulted in? Tell us your answers in the comments below. To begin, let's first have a quick overview of why the Mexican-American War happened. The war between the U.S. and Mexico in 1846 to 1848 stemmed from Texas joining the U.S. and Americans moving further west. When James K. Polk became the President of America in 1845, he tried to get Mexico to agree on drawing the border at the Rio Grande and selling part of California. However, he didn't grasp that no Mexican leader could accept giving up any land like Texas, no matter how much pressure he applied. Polk, annoyed by Mexico's refusal to talk, ordered General Zachary Taylor's army to move from Corpus Christi to the Rio Grande in January 1846. Mexico saw this as an act of war. Then, on April 25th, Mexican troops from Matamoros crossed the river and attacked an American patrol. Polk used this event to get a declaration of war on May 13th, claiming that Mexico has invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil as the reason. Now, let's get to know what significant events led to the declaration of war. The U.S.-Mexico conflict largely arose because Americans wanted to extend their nation all the way to the Pacific Ocean. As American trappers and settlers moved across the Great Plains, they grew unhappy that the areas south and west of the Louisiana Purchase were still under Mexican control after Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821. Americans' continual efforts to settle these regions sparked clashes with the Mexican government, ultimately leading to war. In the 1820s, Mexico welcomed Americans to settle in Texas, but tensions arose as Americans grew dissatisfied with Mexican rule. In 1835, American settlers rebelled against Mexico and established the Republic of Texas the following year. Many Americans immediately pushed for Texas to join the United States, despite Mexico warning that it would lead to war. In the political climate of 1844, James K. Polk, a slaveholder from Tennessee, won the presidential election because he pledged to annex Texas as a new slave state and to acquire Oregon. Just before leaving office in 1845, President John Tyler secured Congress's approval to annex Texas, sparking Mexico to cut off diplomatic ties. Oregon's economic potential made it a key goal for U.S. foreign policy, with Northerners supporting control of its ports for trade with Asia and Southerners hoping for this support in exchange for backing expansion into the Southwest. President Polk, whose campaign slogan was 54-40 or fight, asserted America's right to control Oregon country from 42 degrees latitude to 54 degrees 40 minutes latitude, contested with Great Britain. Despite British refusal to accept U.S. claims to land north of the Columbia River, pressure mounted on Britain due to difficulties defending Oregon and concerns at home and in its empire, leading to a compromise at the 49th parallel in June 1846. In contrast, Polk and the American people were prepared to use force to acquire land from Mexico. Targeting California, Polk's attempts at negotiation faltered after the capture of Monterey. Efforts to purchase Upper California and New Mexico stalled as Mexico, angered by U.S. actions, refused to acknowledge Texas independence. Despite Polk's efforts, Mexico rejected negotiations, prompting him to support American and Californio settlers in seeking independence. In December 1845, after nearly 10 years of public demand for the annexation of Texas, President Polk officially agreed to incorporate the former Mexican state into the United States, adding it as an additional slave state. However, the Mexican government was outraged by this annexation and refused to engage in discussions about selling land to the United States. They even refused to acknowledge Polk's emissary, John Slidell, sent to negotiate in Mexico City. Undeterred, Polk urged Thomas O. Larkin, the U.S. consul in Monterrey, to support any American settlers and Californios who sought independence from Mexico. By the end of 1845, with diplomatic ties severed over Texas and growing concerns about American actions in California, the Mexican government cautiously awaited the next steps from the United States. Upon taking office, President Polk sought to acquire Mexico's northern territories. His initial attempts at negotiation failed, leading him to send troops under General Zachary Taylor to the Rio Grande River in January 1846. Mexico, believing the border to be farther north at the Nueces River, saw this as a provocation, leading to skirmishes and ultimately a declaration of war by Congress. In 1845, an American editor referred to the annexation of Texas as the fulfillment of manifest destiny, the belief that it was destined by divine entities for the U.S. to expand across the continent. By 1846, newspapers nationwide embraced this concept, using it to justify the nation's expansion from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The concept of manifest destiny emerged in the media in 1845, portraying America's destined expansion from coast to coast and beyond. It originated in the early 1840s as the United States sought more land for farms, businesses, and settlements, leading to a focus on the Western territories perceived as vast and untamed. However, this vision clashed with the existing lifestyles of indigenous peoples in the West, leading to coercive actions aimed at their displacement or removal. Manifest destiny was intertwined with notions of racial superiority, with white Americans believing they were superior to native peoples. This belief justified the spread of American ideals to indigenous populations, providing rationale for land acquisition and conflicts with other nations. On May 13, 1846, Congress overwhelmingly approved a declaration of war, but the United States entered the conflict divided. Democrats, especially those in the Southwest, strongly supported the war, while most Whigs, a major political party in the 1834 to 1854 period, saw President Polk's motives as unjust land grabbing. From the beginning, Whigs in both the Senate and the House challenged Polk's claim that the initial conflict happened on U.S. soil. There was also disagreement over whether Polk had the authority to declare war on his own. The main issue was where the conflict occurred and whether Americans should accept Mexico's claim that the Nueces River marked the border. Whig opposition to Polk's claim and the war itself persisted throughout the conflict. Before these events unfolded, America was sharply divided over the idea of going to war with Mexico. Abraham Lincoln, serving as a U.S. congressman at the time, attempted to contest the war by requesting evidence that the conflict originated on U.S. territory. Meanwhile, the transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau practiced civil disobedience by refusing to pay federal taxes that funded the war, resulting in his imprisonment. When the United States went into war against Mexico, it was clearly driven by a fervent desire for expansion. The dispute over the border escalated after the Texas War for Independence, where it was argued that the Rio Grande marked the boundary. Although Santa Anna had seemingly agreed to this, Mexico insisted the border was further north, at the Nueces River. Setting the border at the Rio Grande would give the United States control over unoccupied land, which Mexico opposed as a violation of its sovereignty. Thus, when President Polk sent troops into the disputed territory in 1846, Mexico saw it as an invasion. In January of that year, a U.S. force tasked with building a fort on the American side of the Rio Grande encountered a Mexican cavalry unit. Shots were fired, resulting in the death or injury of 16 U.S. soldiers. President Polk, citing the incident as Mexico's invasion of U.S. territory, called for war. Congress complied on May 12th. Opposition to the war came from the anti-slavery faction, who accused Polk of instigating conflict to acquire more slave territory. Abraham Lincoln and others issued the Spot Resolutions, demanding details of where exactly on U.S. soil the American blood had been shed. Many Whigs also criticized the war. However, Democrats supported Polk and volunteers from across the country, except New England, where abolitionism was strong, eagerly enlisted. The war garnered enthusiasm fueled by the belief that Mexico was weak, impoverished, and its people easily conquerable due to perceptions of ignorance, laziness, and corruption within the country. Before we continue, what are your thoughts on President Polk so far? Do you think that his thoughts and actions are reasonable? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you're interested in watching more videos about world history, unsolved mysteries, and interesting world events, check out our channel. Now let's continue. The U.S. military strategy in the war against Mexico focused on three primary objectives. First, securing control over northern Mexico, including New Mexico. Second, capturing California. And third, taking Mexico City. General Zachary Taylor and his Army of the Center were tasked with achieving the first objective. Utilizing superior weaponry, they swiftly seized the Mexican city of Monterrey. Taylor's success elevated him to hero status among the American populace, prompting President Polk to appoint him commander of all U.S. forces. Now, let's talk about General Taylor's expeditions in detail. In June of 1846, President Polk initiated the Mexican War by ordering American forces deeper into Mexican territory. General Zachary Taylor received orders to advance southward from the Rio Grande into central Mexico, while Brigadier General Stephen Kearny led a small force from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, overland, to capture Santa Fe and the New Mexico Territory. Encountering minimal resistance in New Mexico, Kearny continued westward to California. There, he joined forces with the American Navy and helped secure the outcome of the Bear Flag Revolt, where American settlers had already proclaimed independence from Mexico. Meanwhile, a third force under General John E. Wool marched from San Antonio, Texas, to the Mexican city of Chihuahua. General Stephen Kearny, commanding the Army of the West, accepted the surrender of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and proceeded to gain control of California, leaving Colonel Sterling Price in charge. Despite Kearny's assurances that New Mexicans had no reason to fear for their safety or property, a revolt erupted in January 1847 in an attempt to expel the Americans. Although Price managed to suppress the rebellion, tensions lingered. Upon his arrival in California, Kearny found the territory already under American control, thanks to the efforts of California settlers, U.S. Naval Commander John D. Sloat and John C. Fremont, a former Army captain and son-in-law of Missouri Senator Thomas Benton. Sloat, stationed off the coast of Mazatlan, learned of the outbreak of war and swiftly sailed for California. He seized Monterrey in July 1846, shortly after a group of American settlers led by William B. Ide had taken control of Sonoma and declared California a republic. A week after the fall of Monterrey, the Navy captured San Francisco without resistance. While a brief rebellion by some Californians occurred in September 1846, Many others accepted U.S. authority. Consequently, Kearny's role in California mainly involved assuming governance as its governor. Heading the Army of the South was General Winfield Scott. Both Taylor and Scott were seen as potential rivals for the presidency. Aware that whoever captured Mexico City would gain significant acclaim, President Polk assigned Scott the campaign to prevent Taylor, popularly known as Old Rough and Ready, from overshadowing him. General Taylor's force played a key role in the first major battle of the Mexican War at Monterrey in September 1846. Taylor divided his troops and successfully captured the city on September 24th. Following negotiations, an 8-week armistice was agreed upon, allowing each side to correspond with their respective governments and await further instructions. President Polk had hoped that a series of swift American victories would pressure the Mexican government into relinquishing their northern territories. However, there was no sign of Mexican surrender. Consequently, Polk ordered General Taylor to resume military operations. However, Taylor opted against marching through the challenging terrain of central Mexico to reach Mexico City. Instead, he directed his regular troops to Tampico on the Gulf of Mexico, where they would join General Winfield Scott's command and advance towards Mexico City from the east. Additionally, General Wool was instructed to abandon his march on Chihuahua in order to reinforce Taylor's forces. Meanwhile, Colonel Alexander Doniphan led a new force from Santa Fe towards Chihuahua. While American forces in central Mexico adjusted their strategies, Mexicans in California and New Mexico launched counterattacks in an effort to resist American occupation. Kearny's arrival in California enabled American forces to defeat Mexican Californios at the Battle of San Gabriel and capture Los Angeles, effectively ending hostilities in the region. In New Mexico, American troops led by General Price defeated Mexican rebels at Taos after they had killed officials of the newly established American government. In February of 1847, Mexican forces launched a counterattack at Buena Vista, where they faced the remainder of General Taylor's army, along with reinforcements led by General Wool. Despite having superior numbers, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna inexplicably withdrew from the battlefield, allowing Taylor to claim victory. In March 1847, General Scott captured Veracruz and began advancing towards Mexico City in a northwesterly direction, mirroring the route taken by Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés in 1519. Despite facing fierce resistance every step of the way, Scott's forces gradually closed in on the capital. Mexican soldiers and civilians alike fought valiantly to defend their homeland from the American invaders. Even the defenders of Mexico City, including young military cadets, fought bravely until the end. Legend has it that Cadet Juan Escucha's final act was to protect the Mexican flag, wrapping it around his body as he leapt from the city's walls. As his army advanced westward, they encountered Santa Anna's forces entrenched at Cerro Gordo, a mountain pass blocking the path to Mexico City. American scouts, including Captain Robert E. Lee, discovered a route around Santa Anna's flank, enabling American troops to surprise the enemy. Additionally, American units positioned artillery on high ground, overlooking the Mexican defenses. On April 18th, Scott's army defeated the Mexicans at Cerro Gordo, paving the way for an advance toward Mexico City. After this victory, Scott's army spent 3 months regrouping in Puebla. Many soldiers, at the end of their enlistments, returned home, leaving Scott with a depleted force. Unable to continue the campaign without reinforcements, Scott awaited additional troops. Meanwhile, the Mexican army, in disarray and retreating towards their capital, failed to mount a significant offensive against Scott's weakened corps. In August of 1847, Scott's rebuilt army marched towards Mexico City, attacking from the south to avoid a heavily fortified fortress obstructing their path. Scott achieved victories at Contreras and Churubusco, despite his dwindling forces, largely due to the impact of tropical diseases. Aware of the urgent need to conclude the fighting, Scott pressed forward. On September 13th, American forces captured Chapultepec Castle on the capital's western flank and reached the city's gates by evening, only to find that Santa Anna's forces had withdrawn. On September 14th, 1847, General Scott entered Mexico City's Central Plaza, marking the city's fall. While President Polk and other expansionists advocated for the annexation of all Mexico, negotiations for peace began between the Mexican government and the United States in 1848. These negotiations led to the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, which brought an end to the war. In the ensuing months, Mexican forces engaged in guerrilla warfare, targeting American supply lines. The day after Scott's seizure of Mexico City, Mexican troops laid siege to the American supply depot and hospitals at Puebla, attempting to force Scott to abandon Mexico City by cutting off his supply base. Santa Anna's remaining troops joined the siege. Despite difficulties in communication and supply, reinforcements sent by President Polk arrived at Puebla on October 12th and lifted the siege, effectively bringing an end to the Mexican-American War. The U.S. military achieved remarkable success in the Mexican-American War, employing a blend of innovative strategy, skilled leadership, fortunate circumstances, and at times, ruthless tactics to secure victory. Within just 16 months of the war's commencement, American forces managed to seize control of Mexico City. Additionally, expeditionary units engaged in battles in California and New Mexico, leading to the acquisition of extensive territories. As the conflict drew to a close, the discovery of gold in California sparked a population boom on the West Coast. This influx of settlers ensured ongoing American dominance over the entire West Coast and set the stage for subsequent boundary disputes, such as the conflict over the San Juan Islands. Polk had assigned Nicholas Trist, the chief clerk in the State Department, to accompany Scott's forces and negotiate a peace treaty. However, due to delays in the formation of a new Mexican government capable of negotiations, Polk grew impatient and recalled Trist. Despite these instructions, Trist disobeyed and signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo on February 2, 1848. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo marked a significant victory for American expansionism by securing vast territories from Mexico. Known as the Mexican Cession, this included present-day California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming, nearly half of Mexico's land. Mexico also recognized the Rio Grande as the border with the United States. Mexican residents in the ceded territories were promised future U.S. citizenship once these areas became states. In return, the United States agreed to assume $3.35 million in Mexican debts owed to American citizens, paid Mexico $15 million for the land loss, and pledged to protect the Mexican Cession's residents from Indian raids. In the end, infection and disease proved deadlier to U.S. troops than actual combat during the Mexican-American War. Roughly 10,000 soldiers succumbed to illness, while approximately 1,500 were killed in battle or died from wounds sustained in combat, though estimates of casualties vary. Poor sanitation practices exacerbated the spread of disease, particularly among volunteers who were less disciplined in maintaining sanitary conditions compared to regular troops. Yellow fever was especially rampant, but other diseases like measles, mumps, and smallpox also took a heavy toll, particularly affecting troops from rural areas whose immune systems were not as robust as those from urban environments. The acquisition of new territories during the Mexican-American War intensified the already simmering tensions in American national politics. Even amidst ongoing conflict, Northerners advocating for free labor clashed with Southerners pushing for the expansion of slavery over the fate of these territories. In August 1846, Pennsylvania Democratic Congressman David Wilmot introduced the Wilmot Proviso, aiming to prevent the spread of slavery into any new territories acquired from the war. Northern Democrats supported the proviso as it allowed them to back the war effort without endorsing slavery's expansion. However, Southerners vehemently opposed the proviso, viewing it as a Northern plot against their interests. Despite Congress defeating the proviso in 1846, it resurfaced in subsequent bills related to troop funding and war conclusion. While the proviso never passed into law, its proposal exacerbated divisions within the Democratic Party, splitting it into Northern and Southern factions and setting the stage for the Civil War. Despite the substantial acquisition of the Mexican cession, some argued that the United States should pursue further territorial expansion until all of Mexico was absorbed. Opponents of this idea, particularly from the South, desired more slave territory, but were hesitant about incorporating Mexico's large mestizo, people who were of mixed indigenous and European ancestry, population into the United States. Others were reluctant to absorb a significant Roman Catholic population. These expansionists opposed the notion of acquiring new U.S. territory populated by mixed-race Catholic communities. Furthermore, the war reignited the debate over slavery extension, dormant since the Missouri Compromise. The status of slavery in the newly acquired lands was eventually addressed by the Compromise of 1850, averting civil war for the time being. Many prominent generals in the Civil War, including Confederate leaders Robert E. Lee, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, and Ulysses S. Grant, gained battle experience in the Mexican-American War. Grant later criticized the conflict as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. In Mexico, the war discredited conservatives and left the country in a state of shock and despair. It reinforced negative stereotypes held by both nations about each other. Normalization of relations proceeded slowly after the war. And that's it. That sums up the Mexican-American War. After watching this video, how do you view this historic war, positively or negatively? Share with us your opinion in the comments below. If you enjoyed watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and ring the notification bell. Thanks for watching.